Welcome to the Worship Keys YouTube channel. My name is Carson Bruce. So glad you're here. We talk all things music theory, gear, industry, and ministry for your worship keys playing. If this episode is beneficial for you or you have any questions as you continue to watch, feel free to comment below, and I'd love to hear any feedback that you have along the way. So let's get into today's episode. Today, I have the enormous pleasure of talking with Matt McCoy, who's the founder and owner of Loop Community. So, Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. I just met you back at the Worship Innovators Conference, which happens every October. And it was incredible just to briefly meet you and talk to you. And for anyone wondering what the Worship Innovators Conference is, it's an amazing conference that you put on in Chicago, which you're from Chicago, live in Chicago. What has been your vision with Worship Innovators, and can you share a little bit with my audience about them?
The Worship Innovators Conference is bringing together worship leaders and the top innovators of worship resources to help you become an expert at using technology in worship. Whether you're part of a large or small church, this two-day conference will teach you how to better implement technology and take your worship services to the next level. Discover how to become more efficient in planning, being prepared for the unexpected, and how to integrate the best tech for tracks, charts, service planning, and more. We'll dive deeper into topics such as how to improve your church services on a budget and how to get your worship team on board with change. Join us for a different kind of worship conference, for times of worship and community, impactful talks, and practical breakout sessions. Get ready to become an expert at using technology in worship. Limited space is available, so reserve your spot today at worshipinnovators.com.
I've been going to worship conferences for 15, 20 years. I was a worship leader for a long time on staff at churches. And so it was a part of my job a lot of times to even just go to conferences as a worship leader. But then when I started Loop Community, we were attending worship conferences all the time and setting up a booth in the exhibitor hall, meeting worship leaders when they'd come through, showing them our products, talking with them about what their needs are at their church. And it made me start to think it'd be really interesting if there was a conference that was really practical, that someone could go to this conference and really just learn practical things that they need to know about leading worship, like creating chord charts, running a rehearsal, using tracks, all of those things. But then what if they learned that from the companies that actually created the products and services? So instead of like only having to go to the exhibitor hall to talk to someone over a lunch break, what if the whole conference was actually designed around the founder of Planning Center? Let's have the founder of Planning Center talk to us about how you can use Planning Center at your church. And let's have the guy who started Praise Charts come and talk about what Praise Charts has to offer a worship leader. Not as sales pitches, but as practical training. All of these people, and I've been friends with them for many years, who have started companies like Praise Charts or Worship Tutorials, Worship Artistry, Sunday Sounds, CCLI, all these people have started a product and service to meet some sort of need that a worship leader has, to solve some sort of problem that churches have. And so I'm like, let's start a conference that lets all of those people, gets them all into one place and lets them talk about, here's practical ways that you can use these products and services at your church. So that's what the Worship Innovators Conference is. It's the exhibitor hall upside down. They're all led by the founders of these companies.
That's awesome. I loved it. I loved my time there. I got to talk with David from Sunday Sounds, and we had an episode with David just some weeks back at the beginning of January on the best app to use for your worship keys playing. Really enjoyed the whole conference, but it was a pleasure just to meet David because I've been using his products since 2017. And now just being able to talk to you using Multitracks with Loop Community, I've been using that as well since 2016 and 17 when I was an undergrad in college. And so today, cool. I would just love my audience to hear from you, the founder of Loop Community, to talk about Multitracks. Some churches are still scared of it, skeptical of Multitracks, but of course, it's just a tool that we can use within our worship teams. It's good for people to know the background of who you are and the heart behind what you do. And I got to see that a little bit just coming to the conference, and I got to learn from you and things about you that I didn't know. So I'd love for people to understand what's your heart behind Multitracks and Loop Community, the hardware, the software, and everything that you guys do.
Yeah, that's a big question. I've been using tracks now for over 20 years, a long time. The use of tracks has been around for decades. And whether it's a band like U2 or Coldplay or going back way farther even, have been using tracks to supplement what they're doing. Not that it is karaoke sing along with the track, but it's this idea of using tracks to supplement what you already have going. A band like U2 is amazing. Like they've got amazing musicians, but still they don't think they're too good to use a track. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like a U2 might be using like a shaker in the background, like a track that's actually just playing a shaker or a violin or a string or something. And it's this idea of using instruments that are going to supplement what you already have going. And churches started doing it over the past like decade. 20 years ago, some churches were doing it, but not nearly as many as they are now. And churches are perfect for tracks because a lot of churches are running off of volunteer musicians, and it's
Oh
hard
yeah.
to find musicians. It's hard to find a bass player. Hey, your one keyboard player that you have called in sick. So what do you do? Do you just go on without piano in your worship set this week? There was a day when, yeah, you'd maybe have to, but not anymore. If your
Mm.
piano player calls in sick or you can't find a bass player, you can just use a track to supplement for that missing person. I'm really passionate though about teaching worship leaders how to use tracks in a way that supplements and doesn't replace because tracks are perfect. They sound amazing and
Right.
they're perfectly played every single time,
Yeah.
unlike a human,
Right, right.
where it's not going to be perfect every time and there's going to be missed notes and things. So
Right.
it can be tempting for churches to just be like, hey, you know what? We don't need to find a good electric lead guitar player because we've got a track that plays it perfect every time. And that can be tempting, but I'm passionate about teaching worship leaders about, okay, how do you implement tracks at your church where you're not replacing people? Because people is what matter.
Yes,
That's the
yes.
most important thing in your worship ministry. It's not the tracks, it's not the technology. And worship leaders can sometimes get lost in the technology because it's fun. It's something to like, it's what we're like working on in the office, putting our track set lists together. We can almost spend more time looking at our computer and our tracks than we do looking at the people that are
Wow.
playing in our worship bands.
It's
Like we're,
convicting. Yeah.
if you were to look back at the week, the amount of hours you spent maybe looking at the Prime app or Ableton Live, how many hours did you spend looking at Ableton Live, running your tracks versus looking one of your band members eye to eye? We spent a lot of time looking at Ableton Live and not very much time looking at our bass player in the eye
Wow.
and being like, hey, I'm thankful for you. I appreciate what you're doing at this church and getting to know them, hearing their story. So people are what
Absolutely.
matter. Technology is just a tool. It's just another instrument. It's just another thing that can help your worship ministry run smoothly, sound a little better, but it's not the main thing.
I love to hear the heart behind that. I think that's so important and cannot agree with you more.
Yeah.
I love the theme that you guys had at this past Worship Innovators Conference about create within. I love that. Speak a
Yeah.
little bit about that. I was very inspired by that. It was funny when David came out to an AI generated song about worship. It's like this
Yeah.
peppy song that was created by AI, but no matter with
Yeah.
the AI innovations, and technology innovations, still about the people. Talk about the creating within, that whole idea that you guys shared
Yeah.
about.
Our theme this year, yeah, was create within, and it was really based around this whole idea that God is a creator, that the very first thing we see God do in the Bible is create. In the
Yeah.
beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It's like one of the very first words ever in scripture. And so God's a creator. But then when he creates mankind, but then he empowers mankind. He empowers Adam to create. And he
Mm.
asks Adam, hey, you're going to name the animals. Instead of just saying, hey, Adam, an elephant is called an elephant, or Adam actually gets to create and be creative and name the animals. We are creators. We were created by a creator and we are creators. With worship leading, I just know that it can be hard when we're constantly comparing our church with the church down the road, or our worship leading with the worship leader on Instagram,
Yes.
or our worship band with these major worship bands that sound amazing that are putting out songs all over and videos, and we compare. And we were really wanting to encourage worship leaders, hey, create and sound like you. That's actually a slogan that Loop Community has had for a long time.
Mm.
I think 10 years ago, we were posting all sorts of posts about sound like you.
Mm.
We want worship leaders to sound like who God created them to sound like. that their bands would sound like who they are, that they don't have to feel this weird pressure to be like, okay, as an electric guitar player or as a keyboard player, I have to sound exactly like the keyboard player from
Right.
Hillsong or Bethel or Elevation, right? But
Absolutely.
just like, hey, God uniquely wired you to play the piano in a very specific way.
Yes.
The way that you play chord voicings, the way that have the feel, the sounds you use, that's you.
Yes.
And come alive in that and live in that.
Man.
Be proud of that. Like
Yes.
don't be afraid to be who you are and who God created you to sound like. And so
Come on.
that
You're
was what the
preaching now.
create within.
You're
That's what
preaching now.
that's what the create within theme was about.
That's awesome.
Be who you are and be content with that.
I
Now
love
we
that.
did take it one step further though to say, okay, it's not only though like that it's just the way it is and you can't get better.
Yeah.
We should be improving our craft. We should be like taking care
Of
of what
course.
God's given us.
Of course.
But we shouldn't feel a weird pressure to sound like someone else.
I love that. Really love that. And a few weeks prior to this episode releasing, we released some breakout sessions. They're really just a mini version of that session. I will say to my audience, you guys got to get to the Worship Innovators Conference this year, October 13th and 14th. It's on a Monday, Tuesday. Perfect for churches because we're all busy on weekends. So come on to a conference Monday, Tuesdays, early in the year right now so you can plan ahead. Hey, what do we want to spend our budget on? Let's go to Worship Innovators Conference. Let's get in the room with these innovators, meet you, Matt, get to hear from you, and also get to hear from wonderful leaders. Some of those sessions that you heard here on my podcast were just little snippets from your conference about fatigue in worship, about spontaneity in worship. That's just the tip of the iceberg of what happens at the Worship Innovators Conference. But thank you so much for having this space for people to come and do this.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you said, you can sign up now. The tickets are for sale. Two thoughts that popped in my head. One is, first of all, we've intentionally designed this conference so that it's affordable because I know that some worship conferences can be crazy expensive. We really try to keep them like bare minimum, very affordable, just so that we're like not losing money. A lot of worship conferences lean very heavy on the spiritual side, like, hey, you're burnt out, come get refreshed. And not that's bad at all because it's not, and there's a time and place for that. It's great. There's just a lot of conferences that do that. When we were designing Worship Innovators, it was like, okay, let's not do that. Let's be more like practical. How do you actually deal with auditioning people? How do you deal with cutting a band member if you have to? Rehearsals that go wrong, all sorts of things like that. What's really interesting is that even though every year we intentionally design it to be very practical, always there's a spiritual element that comes into it. It's funny because in all those topics, no matter what it is, let's just say it's like how to make a rehearsal run more smoothly. Somehow in that session, it comes back to the heart of the matter.
Yes.
And it comes back to, okay, like your heart and like where you're at with your relationship with God and where your team members are at with their relationship with God. But really it all boils down to some sort of spiritual element. And that happens. That happens at the conference, but it happens in a different way than it does at other conferences. And I love that about Worship Innovators.
I want to ask some personal questions for you real quick. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but you said that your mother was a pianist. And so you mentioned in a previous interview that she started using MIDI in the 90s, which was cutting edge for sure. So can you tell us more about maybe her setup back then and her influence on you and that music had as a kid? Talk about your mom, talk about the piano, just bring us back a little bit to your childhood and your upbringing a little bit.
I grew up in a vineyard church. My dad was a pastor. And so my dad played guitar and also led worship, and he also preached sometimes, most of the time.
Nice.
And then my mom played piano. And in the way back, this was like in the 80s when I was born, there was just an acoustic piano. But then I do remember there being a moment, and I was too young to remember what the technical details were, but I do remember there was a moment when the church bought an electric keyboard.
Yeah.
Where they moved away from an acoustic piano that was like maybe mic'd. I don't even know if it was mic'd. To like some sort of electric keyboard. I don't know if it was like I remember it was Yamaha. I do remember like the logo on the back.
Yeah.
I mean, I was probably like 7, 8 years old when this happened. And it had like just these like twinkly type sounds. Like the style of piano sounds were so different then. Like 80s, early 90s worship. Almost like when they played, it was like had the bell sound to it.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
So I remember when she got that and she was so excited about the church getting that. And that was because that keyboard, whatever they had, only had a couple sounds in it. Like
Right,
there were
right.
only like, I don't even know, 6 or 7 sounds to choose from.
Wow.
But then I remember there was a time, probably 5 years later, when my mom was like pushing the church to buy some sort of external. It was white. It was about this big, and it was Korg. It was a Korg with a big dial on it and a yellow LED screen, I remember.
Wow.
And it had 200 sounds on it, MIDI.
Ah,
And so she
wow.
plugged it into the MIDI keyboard and would run the sounds like through this. I don't know what that was. I would actually love to look it up. I remember like being a part of the setup team, and I would connect it all, and the Nords started coming and
Of
the apps
course.
started coming.
Right, absolutely. So that's really cool. So now you're an experienced Ableton Live certified trainer, and so you've had experience with Ableton for a long time. And a lot of people, Ableton was the answer for running tracks. And so part of your mission for starting Loop Community and making tracks accessible was actually making tracks easy, which I absolutely love. And many churches and artists too love using Loop Community. I'm here in Nashville and I go to concerts. I was at a concert,
Yeah.
smaller concert recently. It was a singer-songwriter, wasn't a worship service, and they were up there using the Prime app. And I'm like, I love that. But
Yeah.
it's made a huge impact over the years and especially caught on the last 5, 10 years, even more and more. So I heard this in another interview that you're a huge fan of Steve Jobs and that one of his quotes is simple can be harder than complex. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean to then make it simple. Can you talk about simplicity and how that's been always been on the forefront of your mind when you made tracks more accessible and easy for churches?
Mm. That's a great question. And I had forgotten about that quote. That is a great quote.
Isn't it great? I love
And that
that.
simple is harder than complex in a way. I see this all the time in app development and hardware development, that like in website development, user interface, like it is way harder to make something really easy and simple to use than it is to just put all the features in it.
Right.
Because you see that all the time, but there's worship apps. I could name them. I'm not going to, but there's worship apps out there right now that they've just put every feature imaginable in it because
Yeah.
they hear people saying, "Oh, we want this. We want the app to do this. We want the app to do this." And we get it all the time too. People come to Loop Community to say, "Why doesn't Prime do this? Why doesn't Prime do this?" And I'm like, "It doesn't because we've chosen not to do that.
Right, right.
Because if we do it, it's going to make it complex and
Yeah.
it's going to make it the opposite of what our mission is." And so I started using Ableton Live in 2002, a long time ago.
Yeah.
And it was at the time all there really was for a worship leader to run tracks, other than running a track through an iPod or something, like
Right.
running an MP3 file just on an iPod and pressing play and going for it. But Ableton wasn't even designed for worship leaders. Ableton, it's a German company that was designed for electronic musicians and DJs who were making music and remixes. And
Right.
worship leaders, we figured out, oh, here's how we could maybe use session view to run multiple stems at the same time. And we
Right.
made it work. But the funny thing is that worship leaders literally to this day who use Ableton Live in worship, they use like maybe 5-10% of what Ableton can actually do.
Wow.
Ableton is just so overkill for
Yeah.
most churches. For most churches, there are some churches that might need it. But I don't know. I say now that like Ableton, there was a time and place for it, and the time was a decade ago.
Yeah.
And not because it's out of date, but because it's just not, there's now solutions that are designed specifically for churches that make it easier. And
Absolutely.
so when we designed our app, Prime, it was like, okay, let's take those 5 to 10% of features that worship leaders are using in Ableton and let's boil it down into a very simple to use app that's an easy to use interface.
Yeah.
Some of these are complex things. And how do you do it in a way where a volunteer, you could throw them in front of it and they could figure out how to use it right away, like
Right.
intuitively. And there's some areas of the app that I think, a lot of the app that I think we've really nailed it. There's some things that I'm like, oh man, I still want to figure out how to refine it and make it easier. But it was a complex issue that we were trying to simplify. And so everything we do with our hardware, with the app, we're always thinking, how do we make this easy? It's not about just giving everybody all the features,
Yeah.
because not everybody needs all the features.
Right.
We
Right.
could give everybody all the features, which is like what Ableton Live is, but
Yeah.
they're only going to use like 10% of it.
Man, that's good.
You have to be just like really intentional about what is going to serve the needs of most churches.
Now, I know worship leaders who are definitely in the older generation who are using the Prime app like a pro. They're just loading in songs, they're buying, they're
Yeah.
purchasing tracks. Now there's subscriptions that you guys have and offer,
Yeah.
which is really cool. I want people to know about loopcommunity.com, which you're the voice that says intro 2, 3, 4. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Intro, 2, 3, 4. And if you remember, like way, way back on the website, everything was watermarked. And there'd be like a shoom, loopcommunity.com.
Yeah.
And that was my
Yeah.
voice too. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. What I love about it too is the community tracks. So you guys have hardware. There's some hardware in the background of where you are right now, where you're shooting this.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's some foot switches, Looptimus. There's an interface where you
Yep.
can separate all your outs.
This is a blue one, which we only made a few of these. All of them are black now, but for a while we actually made different colors. And this is a blue Looptimus Mini.
What's your
And
favorite hardware piece of gear that y'all have
oh
made?
man, it's got to be the track rig. I feel like that's been the
Nice.
most game-changing piece of hardware for a worship leader.
That is awesome. And the way that you've updated the app over the years to now, it can just the flex outs and everything so easy, where
Yeah.
you can literally put the outs per instrument, not outs per track or channel.
Yeah.
Game changer. Like seriously, y'all have done a great job
Yeah.
with that.
And that's a good example of simple versus complex.
Yes.
There's still things about that I'm like, oh, it's not easy enough. So we've made it easy, but
Yeah,
it's
talk about
still
that some
not
more.
easy enough. And like even like I was leading worship a couple weeks ago and I was trying to route the audio and the clicking cues were going out of the way that they were wiring it on the track rig. It made it hard for me to assign those outputs to all the songs. And I thought like that whole interface of global audio routing, it made me think, okay, this isn't easy enough because I still had to go manually through all of those and change them. And it'd be nice if there was like a apply all or something like, or even like groups, like, okay, all guitars, assign 5 to all guitars. Right now, that list, I think there's like 100 tracks in that list, and you have to go through one at a time.
Yeah.
Once you have it set up, it's great. You're good to go. But if you ever have to go back and change it again on the fly, like
Right.
just rolled into a new church or something and using their setup, it still is more complex than I'd want it to be. So that's a great example of how I'm always thinking, and really these ideas come to me when I'm using it. Like I'm using it myself and I'm like, this isn't easy enough.
Yeah,
We need to
that's
get even
good.
easier.
That's good as the founder owner, you're still using this regularly and thinking,
Yeah.
wow, we can make this easier, which I love.
Yeah.
Do you have any, since I just did an interview with David with Sunday Sounds, he has the AI patch builder. Do you guys
Yeah.
have any plans to integrate more AI into Prime in the future?
Yeah, we do have that on the roadmap. We've got some great ideas in the works. One thing that we do really are excited about is now that Sunday Sounds is a part of the Loop community family, working at more integrations between those two apps,
Yeah.
where keyboard players are actually like in sync with the tracks. And whatever's happening in the set list there, that information is happening over in the Sunday Keys app. And so there's things
Yeah.
like that we're always,
I love
we're,
that.
we've got some cool plans in the works. So
I love that. So we talked a little bit about simplicity. Literally, Prime is the easiest app that you can use. Tell us in a brief way, tell us if you were to start using Prime today from scratch, like maybe there's a worship leader using it right now. They've never used multitracks or listening. I don't know if I really want to get into this. How long would it take them to download the app and maybe just do a typical 4 to 5 song set list in a service 6 days from now? How long would it take them to prep that?
oh gosh. If you've never signed up before, probably 15 minutes. Just create an account, download the app, create an account. It's a free account. But then you go to the website and you browse the songs that you want. So you'd pick the 5 songs that you want. So you can either purchase them a la carte as you want, or we actually did launch a track subscription, which is like a monthly payment. And you can access or unlock, we call it, like you can unlock any track that you need for that month. Once you pick your songs, then like literally creating a set list in Prime takes 20 seconds. Create the
Right.
set list, add the songs to the set list, and you're good to go.
It's
If you need to do
incredible.
any sort of customizations, like changing the key or the tempo, you can do it just with one click. If you need to change the arrangement of the song, that's the biggest game changer, I think, because
Yeah.
I talk to worship leaders even to this day. Every once in a while, I come across still the guy who just will not let go of Ableton Live.
Yeah.
I can't ever totally figure out why exactly, and they're spending so much time putting audio files into Ableton Live and then chopping them up and rearranging the audio and then having to re-export it and then
Yeah.
import it again. When literally in Prime, if you look at it, there's at the top, the whole song is divided up into little blocks, like little
Right.
colored sections. So like the
Yes.
verse might be a red block, the chorus is an orange block, bridge is blue. And literally in the app, if you're like, hey, we want to do the bridge first, you
Yeah.
can just drag that blue block that says bridge to the very beginning of the song, and it's all done like that within
Yes.
5 seconds.
I love that so much. And listen, this if you're a big tech person like I am, big software guy, I use Prime. I've used Ableton Live, used Logic, used Pro Tools, use a lot of those DAWs out there. But y'all, Prime is so amazing. I literally when I do DNOWs, which I just did one here in January, did a few last year as well. I bring my little Alesis MIDI controller. I use the Prime on another MacBook, and when people say, "Oh, I can't do spontaneous worship, I can't do that," you can actually, just like
Yeah.
you would in Ableton Live in the moment, because I have some MIDI cues, and if we want to repeat that section or that bridge, I just keep pressing that button. And
Yeah.
then I have the droning pads on one octave of the MIDI controller, and then you can
Yeah.
have your fade out button, your play, stop, BPMs, keys, all
Yeah.
MIDI mapped. Everything is MIDI mapped, which you've done a great job. So listen, if you're listening to this, you say, hey, you know
Mm.
what? I don't want to just use an app. Literally, it's as simple as a phone app, your iPhone, your iPad, or on MacBook. And it's so simple. I've literally never
Yeah.
had Prime crash on me because you've made it simple, which is awesome. I'm sure there have
Yeah.
been examples. Maybe someone has had it crash, but it's probably a problem with your operating system or your device and not the app itself. Although I have heard, I'm a part of multiple Facebook
Yeah.
forums for Loop community, and people have plenty to share and say on
Yeah.
there, especially when y'all do updates and maybe an update happens all of a sudden on a Sunday and they weren't prepared for it and everything went crazy. Um,
Yeah. There's
but
things that can go wrong, and we try to test as much as possible,
yeah,
but people are all on different devices, different iOS versions. Some people like are still on iOS 14 and refuse to update, and I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, I just can't help you. Like you've got to move up, or
right.
they're literally using an iPad from 2012 and
Yeah,
refuse to spend $200 to buy a new iPad. And I'm like,
right.
and then they complain that Prime's not working very well. And it's we can't stay back in 2012. Like we can't
Right.
keep the app like working on a 2012 device without
Yes,
making the newer versions suffer. So
absolutely.
we have to move forward. There are so many features that people ask us for. There are things that like Ableton can do for sure that Prime cannot. I'm even thinking of like automating volume of instruments in specific parts of the song. If you want to get
Right.
really detailed and granular in like
Yes.
automating volume, that's a feature, for example. Is it something we could do in the Prime app? Yes. But should we? Like
Yeah, right.
2% of our pro ninja users probably would love it and use it. But
Yeah,
for the
yep.
other like 98% of users, it would confuse them
Right.
and not know
Absolutely.
what to do.
Right.
And that is the tricky balance.
Mm, yeah.
And sometimes people have asked us for things where I've just been like, you know what? You probably should just go use Ableton Live. Like you are the person that probably should just go use Ableton Live. You'll be happy.
Absolutely.
And I'd rather you do that. I'd rather you like go leave Prime and go to Ableton Live than for us to ruin Prime for like the other 98% of people
That's
who
good.
just need something basic that works. And
A few more things I want to talk about before we end this episode, but one of it is integrations and one of them is the community track. So we'll talk about
oh,
community
yeah.
tracks first. I love that because I started producing on Loop Community as a independent, just community producer 2 years ago. And I think I have close to 40 tracks on there. And I love it because you can create your own versions of the songs, upload it, and of course there's a submission process. Like you guys
Yeah.
required 2 or 3 songs to be submitted. The levels are a big thing, right? That's been a problem in the
Yeah.
past, but you guys have really fought to make the levels consistent from song to song, so I
Yeah.
appreciate that so much. But there's an application process. I apply for that, and then I can upload any of my original songs on there.
Yeah.
So like my church can use them, but also other people could purchase them. And they have. There have been songs that people purchased from me, and you guys take care of licensing, which is amazing. Can you talk about the community within
Yeah.
Loop Community, which that's part of y'all's name?
It's
Can you talk about
why
that?
community is in our name. It's
Yeah.
actually why community is in our name because we started, that's the way we started. The
I
whole
love that.
platform, every track we sold on there was called a community track.
Yeah. Well, that's
And for
cool.
those listening that don't know what that is, it basically was just a way for a user, say there's a worship leader in Kansas City who creates their own track for a song, they can upload it to our website and other worship leaders can buy it from them. It's a
Yeah.
marketplace for tracks. Now, that was what, 15 years ago? And at that time, a lot of worship leaders were creating their own tracks. There
Hmm.
weren't many places to actually buy them, if
Yeah.
any, actually. There was a time when worship leaders couldn't buy tracks. So what they did is they just created their own. They used software like Logic or GarageBand or Reason or Ableton Live and would create their own track.
Right.
So we created Loop Communities as a platform where people could sell those tracks and buy them, like a marketplace. Now, over the past decade, though, there are more and more tracks available. Now you can get the originals from the artist called
Yeah.
master tracks. You can get other high quality re-records of those. And community tracks have become less popular. I personally really hope that we see a swing back in the other direction.
Mm.
One thing I think is really great about community tracks is they're the cheapest tracks we have. They're
Right.
very affordable. There's still like very high quality options. Now, we try to do our best to make sure that there's a quality standard, and some are better than others for sure. There are some that like probably shouldn't be up there, and when we find them, we take them down. For the worship leader, budget-wise, they're the most affordable. So I love them for that reason because I love that it's providing a track for a church that maybe just otherwise couldn't afford tracks at all.
Right.
We just are at least giving people an option. Okay,
Yeah.
here's a version that, yeah, it's not the original. It's not going to sound exactly like the Phil Wickham version, but it's pretty good and it's half the price. So I love that. But the other reason why I really hope that community tracks make a major comeback is because of this whole concept of what we talked about earlier about create within. I think it's so sad, personally, that worship leaders have gotten into a mindset of just let's just copy the album
Mm.
exactly and let's
Right.
just sound like the album. There was a day, and young worship leaders who just started leading worship in the past 5 years, 5, 10 years, you have no idea because you've grown up into this world. So you've grown up into this whole way of here's the album version, we play it exactly like that, and we use the album tracks to sound exactly like that. But that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself and a lot of pressure to put on Dan, the dentist bass player. A lot of
Yeah.
pressure to put on like Kevin, the chiropractor electric guitar player that you've got to
Right.
sound
Right.
exactly like. And I just really hope that the church and worship leaders get back to just, hey, there's no pressure to just sound and be the elevation worship.
It's good.
Let's just be who we are and let's
Yeah.
just sound the way we are and let's make our own tracks. I mean, this sounds like a crazy thing to say, but if people don't buy their tracks from Loop Community and we're just creating their own, let's get back to that. Like instead of buying the original master track to sound exactly like Phil Wickham, like get creative and make your own track for
Absolutely.
and make it sound like how you want it to sound and how you want your church to sing it and how you want your band to sound
I love that. Love
instead
that.
of just, and it's not karaoke, but I do feel like we end up just sounding exactly like every other church because every other church is using the exact same track. So that's what I
Absolutely.
love about community tracks is they're all very unique.
Yes.
You could search for a song like Holy Forever and listen through all these community tracks and you can hear all the different ways churches all around America are playing Holy Forever.
Yes. I love that. I
And I
love that
love
so
that.
much.
It's like the expression, the creative expression of the local church. So I love community tracks. It's one reason we have not removed community from our name because
Yes.
I just think it's important. I think it's back to, hey, let's just be who God has created us to sound like.
Absolutely, man. No, I
So
love that so, so much. And I know so many people are so thankful for that feature and the community that you guys have built. There was a song, there was a smaller song called Jesus Did It that Catherine Mullins wrote with the ramp in Hamilton, Alabama. And that song, I know when I submitted it, it got approved, but it took about literally like 8, 9, 10 months for it to go live on the website. Can you explain to people why it takes that long?
some go very fast and we can get it up right away. Some are harder to get. And mainly the reason it's not because of quality, because if it's poor quality, we reject it and it's
Yeah,
gone. If there's a wait, it's always because of licensing. And the reason there's a wait is because we get approval from every person who has ownership on that song.
that's good.
And sometimes it's hard to track down one of those owners. Modern worship songs have maybe 5 writers on them. And Sometimes it's very easy because all those writers are represented by major publishers that we already have agreements with and we're good to go. And
Right.
so, boom, we can clear it and it's good to go. But sometimes there are songs when there's like maybe half the song is like cleared because it's a major publisher that we already work with. But then the
Hmm.
other half, or like maybe a quarter% of it, is some obscure songwriter out of like nowhere that
Yeah.
isn't signed with anybody, and we literally have to do like investigative work to find that person. Sometimes for real, it's we have to be like searching all the socials, be like messaging them. We do everything we can. We have to be like investigators basically. And then to get them to be like, "Hey, can we use your song on our website?"
Wow.
And we have to get
Okay.
their approval.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sometimes they won't do it. Sometimes they're like, "No."
Okay.
Usually because not because like they really don't like loop community and don't want us to do it, but it's because sometimes songwriters can be skeptical about who's using their music and where and why and how and are they getting paid
Absolutely.
fairly?
Got you. Yeah.
And we have to educate them and be like, hey, you know what? This is fair. You're going to get paid the same amount that we're paying Chris Tomlin. But
Right.
a lot of it's just education. Here's what loop community is. Here's why.
Thank you
And
guys for going
yeah,
the extra effort, the extra mile to do that for people and for churches all around the world, really. I want to talk about the integration because at the Worship Innovators Conference, when you talked about actually using charts and other things to literally press play on the tracks and then the chart will highlight the certain measures, can you
yeah,
tell our listeners a little bit about the full integration that you
yeah.
guys offer?
A year ago, we launched chord charts on Loop Community. So for years, we've only sold tracks. And then a year ago, we launched chord charts, which actually the chord chart matches the track exactly.
That is so cool.
Which that alone is awesome. And you can buy
Yeah.
those chord charts for $1.99. So when you buy your track, you could add on the chord chart for $1.99.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it matches exactly the arrangement of the track. But we were like, okay, let's take it a step further and make it dynamic. And what that means is, let's just say in the Prime app, in our app, someone rearranges the song and puts the bridge at the beginning or changes the key of the song.
Yeah.
If someone had already printed out that PDF, that's it. They'd have to like just use a pen to be like, no, hey, we're starting with the bridge. What we did is we have an app called the Charts app, and a worship leader or a musician in the band can pull up the charts in this charts app and it
Yeah.
syncs with our Prime app so that when any change is made to the track, like an arrangement issue, like an arrangement change or a key change, the chord chart dynamically updates on everybody's tablet in the worship band.
That's
So
incredible.
now the bridge section on the chord chart literally goes to the top of the chart,
I love that.
or the chart changes to the key that someone changed the track in. So it's always in sync. And even better, when the song is playing through Prime, the current section that they're in is highlighted on everybody's iPad.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
everybody knows exactly where they are in the chart.
That is
So
so cool, man. So
that's an
cool.
integration we're doing. We're working on a big one right now with slide integration so that not only are your charts in sync, but actually all your slides are automatically in sync with the Prime app as well.
That's incredible. Okay, I want you to tell us more about the full integration for the people who want to go all out, right? So you can actually control your slides for the lyrics, you can
Yeah.
control the charts, and you can actually control
So
lighting as well. Tell us all about that complex world.
first of all, the chart one I just talked about is not MIDI actually. It's more of
Really?
it's a different proprietary protocol that's happening
Okay,
on the
okay, it's
back end.
completely
So that's
separate.
MIDI is not even involved in the
And it's
charts
all is
piece.
it wireless? Do you have to be
And
on Wi-Fi for this to
uh,
happen?
that's a good question. The charts piece, I think it's just Bluetooth.
It's Bluetooth capability. Okay,
Yeah, I think
cool.
so.
Okay.
I don't think Wi-Fi is involved. I should know the answer to that question, but I
No,
don't
you're
off the
good.
top
You're
of my
good.
head. I
Just
think it's
curious.
Bluetooth. There
Very
does have to be
nice.
some sort of connection though, but I believe it's Bluetooth. But you bring up MIDI, and that's because historically, in the past 5 years, MIDI integrations has become a major like buzzword. MIDI
Uh,
automation, like everybody
right,
was wanting to automate Pro Presenter with Ableton
right,
Live. And the way
right.
they did that was using MIDI. And this comes back to the conversation of complex versus simple.
Yeah.
You can, with MIDI, you could automate Pro Presenter, have all your lyrics automated. You can also automate like your lighting console using MIDI. And today you can do that inside of the Prime app. We have a feature called MIDI out, which lets you do that. But it's complex.
Right.
That's actually one of the features I look back on and I'm like, I almost wish we didn't do it because it ruined it for some people because
Oh
it's
no.
just a complex feature. Now you
Right.
can do it. But I think it's still too complex, which is why we're building all these integrations that are not going to require MIDI at all.
Mm-hmm.
And the charts one that I was just talking about was our first step. Our first
Yeah.
step was doing the charts app. And that kind of proved the concept that we don't have to do MIDI at all to do
Right.
this. Literally, it's just like tapping in settings like connect to Prime and boom,
Right.
they're connected. The next step now is going to be that, but for presentation software.
Oh, that's cool.
And then who knows, maybe making a cup of coffee or
Yeah.
whatever else we can automate.
All the
But
things.
it's
That's super
amazing what you
cool.
can do with MIDI, but it's definitely ninja status. It's
Right.
not like my mom couldn't do it.
My college ministry back in Alabama, the tech guy was a guru because he was an IT guy. He's actually a software developer for Amazon now. He lives in Nashville, but he was incredible. He was the mastermind behind putting those MIDI cues for the lighting. So like he would run the
Yeah.
tracks and then, but Pro Presenter and the lighting would be cued off of Loop Community. And this was in 2018, 19.
Okay. Yeah.
So he did some stuff in there.
We have
And
tons
if
of videos out there that talk about how to do it.
really, okay, I'll link those here in the
So,
description. So if anyone
yeah,
wants to learn, they can do it.
on our YouTube channel, we've got a video on how to use MIDI to control Pro Presenter. I would like
That's
to get
awesome.
away from MIDI programming just in general because it's tedious. You have to like for
Yeah.
every like slide change, add a MIDI change or add a MIDI
Right.
note in the timeline.
Yeah, and there's more things that could go wrong, that kind of thing.
When I think back to when I was like on staff at a church before all this stuff was a thing,
Yeah.
I wasn't spending my days looking at MIDI notes on a timeline. And is that what the worship leader job has come down to? Is
Man,
that what the church is like paying you to do? And I don't know. I want to free up worship leaders so that they can do like people ministry and
man, that's
not
great.
Ableton timeline ministry.
I love that, man. I love that
And
so
hey,
much.
listen, this is coming from someone who like I am deep into the world of tracks. I was an
Yes.
Ableton certified trainer for a decade.
Yeah,
But at heart, though, I'm a worship pastor and I
absolutely.
want people to get back to the people part of it.
That's
And
awesome.
let's let the technology not run the show.
Absolutely. No, I love that, man. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing, Matt, here on the Worship Keys podcast. And I'll end with this, but is there any
Yeah.
final comments you'd like to talk about Loop Community? And do you have any last words to Worship Keys players specifically or worship leaders in general? Any last words for them?
Yeah, we are excited about this coming year. We did actually just last week announce a new Looptimus Mini, which is fun. The Looptimus Mini that I just showed you there has always been wired up until this point.
Okay,
And so now the Looptimus Mini Plus, which we've just announced, is a wireless version of the Looptimus Mini,
that's awesome.
battery powered, Bluetooth. And it's not just a MIDI controller. There's a switch on the back where you can switch it to be also a keyboard
Oh,
key
wow.
commands. So you could use it. What makes it great is that now people could use the Looptimus Mini as a page turner for something like a charts app.
Wow.
So anything that doesn't accept a MIDI, that just accepts key commands. So now the Looptimus Mini does that. So we're excited
Super cool.
about getting that out. We've got some really cool features that I can't talk about that will be released for Prime. We're really got a great roadmap for 2025 for Prime features.
Amazing.
This past year, the past 6 months, we've spent a lot of time and focus and energy building out website features. This next year is Prime app. We're going to be doing
Absolutely.
some really cool features inside of that. So
Can't wait, man. Y'all go
I
follow
know.
Loop Community on
Yep.
Instagram, on YouTube, also loopcommunity.com. And is there any other way that people can learn or get involved with Loop Community?
If you're brand new, if you've never used it before, go to tracksmadeeasy.com. Tracksmadeeasy.com, and you can take a course that gives you everything you need to know about how to use all of this stuff. So
Super
I'm
cool.
passionate about that. Go to tracksmadeeasy.com, get what you
Love
need
it.
there,
Love
and
it,
come to
Matt.
Worship Innovators. Come meet
Yes.
us and hang out with us.
October 13th and 14th in
Yep,
Chicago. Gonna be great.
worshipinnovators.com.
Worshipinnovators.com. All this will be listed in the description and show notes. But Matt McCoy with Loop Community, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Worship Keys podcast. And can't wait to see you again this fall in Chicago.
Yep. Thanks for having me, Carson.